Hello, and welcome to Creative Banter, a creativity and philosophy-focused podcast where anything goes. I'm your host, Cody Schultz. Joining me is the one and only Murray Livingston? That's right. This week, I'm joined by photographer Murray Livingston, which was surely a change of pace. Through the episode, we speak on topics such as seeing in black and white, alternative printing processes, and working in projects. Let's dive right into it, shall we? So this is going to be a little different talking to you instead of Ben here, Murray.
Yeah, I know, I've got some pretty large shoes to fill, but
Yeah.
pun intended.
Yeah, I'm not sure what shoe size Ben is. That's I'll have to ask him next time that I talk to him. But yeah, so how have you been?
I've been pretty good. As I was just saying a few moments before we started recording, it's been a little while since I've gotten out with the camera. There was like a hint of fog the other morning. Here in the UK at least, the seasons are definitely changing earlier this year. We've had like huge droughts, so I think all the trees think it's autumn already.
Yeah, we get that over here too. We're just now getting a ton of rain, at least in Pennsylvania here. That's the past
That's
2 days.
good.
It's been like nothing but rain, which is great. We need it, but the trees, like with you guys, are just, they think it's October. And I'm like, no, not
Yeah,
quite.
exactly. But I mean, photography-wise, that's kind of getting me a bit excited. You know, things are changing from the chaos of summer into something a bit different.
Now
So-
remind me, are you completely black and white, or do you do color as well?
When I shoot film, I'm completely black and white, but I do occasionally take a color image on digital.
Okay.
Only like very, very rarely, just for fun.
Right.
I wouldn't include it in like a portfolio or anything. But
Yeah. I've always
Yeah.
felt that color was kind of, it's just so different to see in it. Like for me, I see a lot more of the textures and the tonalities in a scene since I've been doing black and white for so long. Whereas like to shift over
Yeah.
to color is kind of it. I think my compositions would suffer if I would go over to color completely, just because I'd be eyeing up the color and seeing that as the main draw to the image and not thinking so much about the other elements of the photograph.
I think that's a good way to put it, as like the color being the main draw as opposed to the composition or the content or whatever your ideas that you're bringing with you. When we work in black and white, personally at least, color is like plays much more of a supporting role, and I tend to use it in a creative way as opposed to it being the subject itself.
Right.
I don't know if you find that the same. I don't know if you sort of consider color in your black and white photographs.
I do, but only based on like the tonality shifts of it. So like I was talking to I was talking to my dad at one point, and he was asking about like fall color and why I was like not really concerned about it, but it's going to be a terrible year for it. And he was like, well, what does it matter for you with your photographs, because you're all black and white. And so I was explaining to him, like, well, if you have all the trees in a scene that are completely green, all pretty much one shade of green, you don't have that same depth that you get if you have some that are real bright red versus yellow versus orange and some green. It adds...
Yeah, there's no tonal separation
right,
at all.
it adds a lot of depth to it, so it makes that scene a lot more interesting, even if you aren't displaying that color in the proper way. And then you get into filtration as well, which I'm not sure if you use a whole lot of.
On film photography, 100%. That's the main thing for me with full color, especially. Like, I always joke that full color is actually a black and white photographer's best friend. Because it makes, especially in the woods, it makes such a big difference when you've got, like, here in the UK you get bracken and ferns that go like beautiful rusty colors,
right.
And you get these sort of the whole understory, and you put on a red filter or an orange filter, and it just sort of lights up the scene, which you can't do any other time of year.
Yeah.
So it's really interesting, brings up some really interesting opportunities for sure.
Yeah, I think the only filter that I have is a deep red filter. And honestly, I don't use it terribly often.
Yeah, it's tricky with the deep red because it's such a dramatic shift.
Yeah.
I think I've got a deep red as well, but I've also got a yellow and an orange, and I may have a green, I think. I don't use that very often. But yeah, between the yellow and the orange, one of those is usually permanently attached to the lens.
Yeah, most of the time when I'm using a red filter, I'll go and it'll be because of having a lot of sky in the image, or like so that I get the dark black sky with the puffy white clouds. That always tends to help add some more drama to it. Or if I have a lot of red in the scene and I want to make that stand out a little bit more, brighten that up some. But I've thought about getting, especially for woodland work, like a green filter or something else to help.
Yeah.
To help with that tonality separation, but still have yet to do it.
I guess I'm now anyways, in the UK I'm shooting predominantly digital at the moment. Just, there's lots of other considerations that have made me do that. But what it means is every single time I edit an image, I'm changing it from color to black and white. So I'm immediately forced into thinking, like, right, how am I going to treat the colors, that translation between the two? Whereas with film, if you haven't already used the filter out in the field, you've got a black and white image. That's that.
Yeah, that's the one thing that I miss about digital is just the ease of being able to play with color and the hue throughout the entire translation as you're going over to black and white, because you could really make that image exactly what you want it to be. Whereas with film, you kind of have to, if you're not using filters beforehand or working with it really heavily, I think in like the dark room or in post-processing, it gets a little bit trickier to get that tonal shifts.
Yeah, and you can make it, like just the other day, you can make it really, really subtle. I was working on a waterfall scene in a woodland, and in the translation process, I desaturated the shadows so that the black and white filter that I then applied would only affect the highlight green values that were bright. So you can get really, really creative with it and use it in certain parts of the image as well, not in others. I guess it's just a bit more flexible than it being sort of, the red filter over the whole image circle.
Right. And I think that also helps a lot of people if you're trying to get into, say you want to get into black and white film, but you're currently shooting digital. I think a big recommendation that I could have for people would be to really play around and see what tonal shifts you can make with your digital images, translating them into black and white if you're not used to working in black and white. Because then you can go into the field after you decide to get with film, and you can pick up the filters that you think you're going to need the most.
Yeah, and then you at least have some idea of how those are going to affect the final image before you do it.
Yeah, because, I kind of went into it blind. I knew that I wanted the deep red filter just because you have that stereotypical real black sky image.
Yeah.
Which...
it's Ansel Adams.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, pretty much.
Exactly, right. Yeah.
But I like that high contrast look to a decent number of my images, but there are also times where I
Right.
think a yellow filter would be a lot nicer to use, or like I had said before, like a green filter where I can have in the intimate woodland scenes a little bit more separation, a little bit bring out colors a little bit more.
It's funny. I was looking through your portfolio on your website the other day, and from memory, I wouldn't have said there was a lot of high contrast scenes. My memory is sort of that it's quite long tonal scales, as opposed to high contrast. If that makes
Okay, yeah.
any sense, like a lot of mid tone, and greys, but still a full range of values. So you still have blacks and whites, but there's a lot in between as well. It's not just black and white.
Yeah. Are you familiar with Cole Thompson's work?
Not. I know who he is, but I'm not off the top of my head.
Yeah, he's very very heavy on the contrast, and Ben and I were actually talking about him, I think, last week. Yeah, and very heavy contrast range with him. So I guess, to me, mine aren't even close to that. I can definitely see what you're saying about like more of an elongated tonal range.
Yeah. So I mean, yours to me look as though they're sort of platinum palladium prints,
which is always something that I wanted to get into, but the expense of it is just terrible.
I know it's it's really hard to pull the trigger on that one.
Are you doing any like handmade or inkjet printing?
Yeah, I do both. I'm currently trying to, eventually get to platinum palladium, but I figured I'd do sort of a contact printing process called argyrotype first.
Okay.
It's an iron silver process, kind of similar to a cyanotype or like a Van Dyke brown, but it's quite a modern formula, and so it uses a lot less harmful chemicals, and you just process it in distilled water, and you expose it in a UV exposure unit. So it's pretty simple. You don't need a darkroom, and it's quite inexpensive. So I figured I would try like the handmade contact printing realm first before I go and spend a few grand on platinum and palladium.
Yeah, it's so. Yeah, I started with I did do some handmade prints maybe a couple years ago was when I started a little bit with it, doing calotypes, which are kind of like the cousin to platinum palladium.
Yeah, so what I'm doing is very similar to calotypes.
So I made or I should say my dad and I made a UV exposure unit box, whatever you want to call it, which works really well. I just haven't used it since a couple months after having made it, which is a shame.
How come?
But I like to prioritize my time in the field a lot more than with sitting at home or doing prints or in front of a computer or whatever. But I've always wanted to get into platinum palladium printing. That's always been kind of like the ultimate goal. But at the same time, like I'm saying, I don't want to be stuck inside any more than I have to. So I'd much rather see myself out in the woods, out in the field, making photographs and enjoying my time there, instead of becoming essentially like how Ansel Adams was, whereas he was constantly in the dark room and constantly working on prints.
Well, especially like later into his career, right?
Yeah. I mean,
do you find that you have like a huge backlog of work that you need to either process or develop, or?
Not tremendously. So for instance, I just got back from my family cabin for the weekend, and I'd gotten an Mamiya RB67, which is a medium format film camera, and I decided that I was going to work on a little project where I went out for what ended up becoming like a 3-hour walk just around the entire property, and came away with about 6 rolls of film, so 60 photographs or so. Which
from the one
yeah,
walk.
yeah.
Right.
And so now I have...
That's a lot of photographs.
Yeah, it is. But it's not without its purpose. And so that is kind of right now my backlog. But for the rest of this week, I'll pretty quickly get through developing it, scanning it in, and then start working on the project that I have in mind for it.
When did you get that camera?
Last Friday, actually.
Okay,
Yeah.
right. So how's the transition been from? Well, I suppose not really transition, but how have you found the difference between having to carry, I don't know how many film holders you carry normally for 4x5, but you're generally quite restricted with the number of frames that you can shoot. How is that, being able to make 60 images in a single walk versus 8 to 10?
It's really different. Normally I'm restricted to about 3 film holders for my 4x5 at a time that I carry around, and I have 6 of them, so I could have up to 12 photographs, but I still like to restrict myself and also lower that weight a little bit with hiking and everything, so I keep it to around 3, which is 6 photographs. But the nice thing with this RB67 is that I'm going into it with a totally different mentality. So I'm not thinking that any of these are going to be true portfolio-worthy photographs. Rather, they are miniature bodies of work that will become either an ebook or a zine or something in the future that is more of a demonstration of playing with light and just helping to practice with the seeing of light and the photographic process as a whole.
So it's kind of like a visual journal in a way.
Yeah.
Less formally structured than how you might go about things with 4x5.
Right. Yeah.
I had the same experience. I was shooting a lot of 4x5, and then I tried out an RZ67.
Okay.
Which I didn't end up keeping, but I found the same sort of process shifts where, you're thinking in terms of a series of images as opposed to 1 or 2 frames at a time. Did you find yourself sort of shooting diptychs or triptychs even, trying to sequence things in a certain way?
So with this project, and I spoke with Ben a little bit about this for the episode prior.
Right.
But this project is based, or inspired by, I should say, a book by Tim Carpenter, whereas he takes medium format photographs of a walk that he did, a 2-hour walk, just on Christmas Day. And it ended up becoming a book. And that's kind of the general idea of what I want to do with the photographs that I took during my own 3-hour walk on the property specifically. So it was weird because I was walking around with this essentially 2.5-pound weight sitting in my hand because I don't have a strap for it, which makes things even worse. So, and I didn't want to carry on a tripod, but I woke up around 6:30 in the morning and began my walk from then, and I was using 100 speed film, which was not the ideal choice for when you have very little light. And it was interesting to go through and execute this project just because of the just major difference that you had between 4x5 and 6x7. So each photograph, I just did one photograph of each scene that I came across and played it very loose, just got my compositions as close to what I had in mind for that particular scene as I could, shooting handheld with a waist level viewfinder. And yeah, I mean, it was so different from 4x5. It was so much quicker, so much just looser, I guess you could say.
Yeah, I was just going to say I recognized the book name because it was on a recent Matt Day YouTube
That's
video.
how I found it, yeah.
He does a... Oh, okay, right. I thought it... Yeah, I was like, oh, okay. No, yeah, that's a really cool concept, and it's a good sort of creative exercise.
Yeah, it was nice just to be able to get out and just practice photography without really worrying too much about, oh, is this going to end up in my portfolio, or is this going to be good enough for whatever purpose? I mean, do you ever find yourself thinking that, especially switching from film back to digital, where one you can be a little bit more playful with than the other?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, there's obviously the cost involved with large format each shot, and less so with digital, obviously. But if you're going to get a top end digital, it still costs a lot of money. But I definitely find myself working the scene a bit more and either trying out different filters, trying long exposure. I do still have that pressure that you're talking about, though, because lots of the work that I'm making at the moment, I've been up in Scotland hiking up mountains, and so I spend quite a bit of time and effort getting up to those places, and you're only there once. Well, you can go back, but
Everything's gonna be different.
Either that, or I've got to drive all the way up there, and it's going to take a lot of time.
Right.
So you still have the pressure, but it's as you said, you can play a little bit more within that space.
So, with your work as a whole, and you had mentioned this a little bit prior to recording, what is like your major goal for a lot of your work? Is it just individual photographs of a place, or do you kind of work more in a larger body of work?
Definitely in sort of long-term projects or bodies of work. There was about, I think it's actually sort of a year ago, maybe last month, was when I started the Scotland project, and I had sort of two concepts in mind going into it, and I knew that those would evolve the more and more that I made images. So the first was just plain and simple, like get onto mountains and go and see some, really beautiful places, and then let the idea evolve out of that. And the second was to do with all these water bodies in Scotland. Obviously there's loads of lochs and rivers and everything, so I wanted to explore some of those areas. And over the course of the last year, they've kind of merged together as I've done more research on the geology of these different places that I've been visiting. So a lot of the lochs are actually formed over the last ice age. They were carved out by glaciers.
Okay.
So there's a link between sort of the mountains and the way the mountains are shaped and the geology of those mountains and the bodies of water that surround them. So yeah, that's what the project that I'm currently working on is evolving into. How that eventually turns into, a physical creation, whether it's a book or an exhibit. I'm not 100% sure yet. I do think I want to try and do a book at some point. But yeah, it's fairly prohibitive in terms of cost. We were talking about platinum palladium earlier. Getting into printing a book is pretty serious money as well.
Yeah, I'd sooner do platinum than print a book. It's cheaper.
Yeah, you're not wrong there. So yeah, I think that's going to be something that I build up to, and then that way I'm not sort of rushed into trying to finish the project up. I can let it go on for a few years, maybe start some other projects in the meantime, and then when it's ready, it can be, formally published.
Yeah, I've always found it interesting how some people can really work well in kind of like creating collections of work or projects versus like me. A lot of the times I'm just doing essentially one-off images. I'm not really thinking about an overlying theme or project with them. Like this past weekend, like I was saying about that collection, was really one of the first that was actually a true project that I had in mind. There's one other one that's not nature themed that I've mentioned briefly here and there, and that's about Coca-Cola machines, and that I just find on my travels, and that's something that I want to turn into maybe just like a zine or an exhibit at some point, just for the fun of it. But to work on such a big project like what you're describing, where it's a multi-year endeavor, is something that's very foreign to me. So for you, how do you continue to be inspired enough to work through those projects?
Well, I mean, the inspiration comes and goes. It's not, solid inspiration the whole time. I would say I'm motivated to do it, and then when the inspiration strikes, you make the most of it. Really, just getting out there is I find the most inspiring thing. Scotland's a pretty big place, and there's hundreds and hundreds of mountains to climb. So, visiting new areas for me, you can I definitely draw inspiration from that, even though it's within the same country. So it sort of feels like fairly local in that way. It's not like going back to the same woods over and over again. But yeah, sometimes it's a real struggle, and I've definitely, within the last year, sort of felt like I'm not sure where I'm going with things. But then all of a sudden, I make an image and it sparks another idea, and then the ball gets rolling. So yeah, it is just a case of getting out there and keeping on making images. I was going to ask, when you were describing that you don't work in sort of longer term projects, are most of your photographs within a fairly small sort of geographical location?
I was kind of thinking along that same lines as I was saying it, that it's not necessarily a project that I thought of getting into on the outset, but it's definitely become a project in and of itself. So a lot of my photographs, I don't remember how many I have in my portfolio on my website, but about 13 to 15 of them are all taken at my family's cabin in northern Pennsylvania, mm-hmm. which kind of makes it into a project of itself, or I guess I would classify it more so as like a collection, which is, it's interesting to even think about, because it's something that I've thought of doing with that of like a book or something on that property, which is kind of where this project with the RB67 kind of came from as well, of wanting to do maybe like a mini collection there, and then take some of those images, put it into the portfolio, and eventually make a big book and true exhibition on this property. But all of that has kind of just recently been developing more so within my own thinking, rather than something where I purposely set out, because I think I have an issue where if I purposely set out to do something, so like with these Coke machines, I kind of get a little bored with it, where I'll want to rush the process through instead of just letting it develop and really taking my time with it. I want to have all of the images that I want for completing this project tomorrow to be done versus thinking about it as a long-term thing. And that's where my issue with projects comes in.
Yeah, I mean, I guess there's lots of different ways to formulate your project. Like, sometimes it is a preconceived idea. Other times you sort of stumble into it. And then there's, are you going to go theme-based, location-based? What's the structure that the project's going to take? And there's no right answer, right? That's one of the fun things about working in bodies of work. You get an opportunity to play with ideas, to sequence photographs in different orders, so they take on a life beyond just the single image.
And then you have the whole idea of, once you have this project completed, what are you going to do, like you mentioned, kind of like structure-wise with it? What do you plan on doing? Is it just going to be like a little ebook that you put out, or is it going to be something bigger, like a full-on exhibit with a book? Or the possibilities are endless, but money isn't.
Yeah, I mean, I've been talking with a few people who have recently put books out just out of interest to try and, understand the process of it better. And from my understanding, 99% of photographers are reliant on pre-sales. And then the others are really lucky in that they've probably done a book already, and so the publisher has come back to them and said, yeah, we're keen to work with you again. So, I mean, no one's got, 20K lying around just to chuck into a book project.
Yeah, it's insane to think about how costly it is and just how easily it could fail as well. And that's got to be a very, especially for someone like you or I, where we're just starting off with this book project and don't necessarily have the name to our work that some other people might, and to try and put something out and then watch as it just kind of crumbles. It would be devastating.
Well, hopefully that doesn't happen to either of us.
Yes, hopefully not, but the possibility is unfortunately very, very much so there.
I hope you enjoyed our creative banter. You can learn more about Cody's work by visiting his website, codyschultz.com, and you can find my work at benhorn.com. For further discussion, join us at patreon.com/creativebanter. It's a place where we can interact with you, the listener. And although we greatly appreciate those who contribute by joining a tier, discussions are open to everyone, whether you're a paying member or not. Thanks so much for listening, and we'll see you around next time.